Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and it is time for another whiskey tasting. This is a whiskey that I've been excited to present to you for a while. I've wanted to get a bottle of it myself. I've been on tour at the distillery. I love that distillery tour. I tell people if you go to Speyside that you need to go to HIGHLAND to see the state-of-the-art distillery, and then you need to go to Glenfarclas because it is a family-owned distillery, one of the few in Scotland, and you need to do a tour of that place because it is a fantastic tour. Glenfarclas meaning Valley of the Green Grass. It is a beautiful setting. It's probably maybe a 3, 4, or 5 minute drive from Aberlour and being right in the heart of Speyside. They call themselves Highland rather than calling themselves Speyside, which is interesting because it actually says Glenfarclas Distillery, Speyside, Scotland, but they call themselves Highland. There's a reason for that, I think. Now, this is my opinion, this is not fact, but I think that the reason that they call themselves Highland is because when you think of Speyside whiskeys, you think of very sherry heavy whiskeys. And although Glenfarclas 12 is aged in Oloroso sherry casks, to me it is the least sherry typical whiskey that I've had in Speyside or in that region. And like I say, all these distilleries are really close to each other. The difference between the Highlands and Speyside is basically there were a lot of distilleries that gathered around the River Spey, mainly due to the Strathspey Railway that went through there. And so because there were so many, they just decided, well, we won't call these Highland. Let's go ahead and give them their own designation. And actually, previous to that, they were known, that area was known as Glenlivet, not after the distillery necessarily, but this was the Glenlivet region. And so if you go into Glenfarclas's warehouse, you will see the word Glenlivet written on some of the barrels, and that is because of that relationship to the region rather than necessarily to Glenlivet as a distillery. So it's really interesting history. Interesting history with this whiskey as well. It's the Grant family, but it's not the same Grant family that owns right down the road your Glenfiddich and your Balvenie. That's a different Grant family. So, and the Grant family still owns it. George Grant, I believe, is the current man in charge at Glenfarclas. Their house is right on site. One of their old pot stills sits out in the parking lot. They're huge pot stills. And one of the things that makes Glenfarclas very unique is that they still fire their distilleries. They're not using steam, heat. They're not using anything but fire, which is the way that for generations you made whiskey. So does it make a difference in the flavor of the whiskey? Well, we'll go in and we'll do a nosing and a tasting on this. I also want to send a shout out to Glenfarclas because when I was doing my research for my Whiskey Lore episodes in season 1, I was really trying to find information about the man who wrote this book about Tommy Dewar's trip around the world, Malcolm Greenwood. And there were some complications in the way that he left working for Glenfarclas, but they still were nice enough to let me know that yes, he had worked there, but unfortunately I couldn't get in touch with him because he had passed away. And my second episodes of Whiskey Lore, the Whiskey Lore Stories, is basically built around that story of me trying to find out who wrote that book, because it's a fun book. If I have a dream in my life, something I would love to do at some point, it is follow in the footsteps of Tommy Dewar when he did his 1893, 94, 95 tour around the world. setting up distributorships and introducing people to Scotch whiskey through doers. And so anyway, it's a fun story, but I really appreciate that they at least let me know what was going on there, and why they couldn't really give me any more information than they did. It is, like I say, it's a cool distillery visit, because when you go, after you do the tour and you see all of this stuff, and you see those old casks, and really they do a great job of walking you through the process, and you see those beautiful copper stills that they have. They're like Hershey's Kisses. They're beautiful pot stills. But they have all this like 1970s equipment in there, because that's when they did their major refurbishing, was right in the middle of the whiskey depression. So it's a fascinating distillery to go visit. But when you end up doing your tasting, you're actually in the ship's room, which is it's the actual paneling out of a ship that was built pre-World War One, and the ship actually stayed in commission until 1973, and at that point they broke it down, and then it ended up becoming the tasting room within Glenfarclas. It's a really cool place to hang out and sip some whiskey before you head back out. So, like I say, been looking forward to doing a review on this one for a while. Glenfarclas was not a whiskey that as soon as I got home, I said, I need to buy that. I was a little perplexed by the flavor and the nosing on it when I was there, but let a year or two go by, and all of a sudden I buy a bottle of it, and now here's my chance to revisit it. And it's been an interesting experience, because my palate has grown. My ability to nose a whiskey has improved greatly over the last couple of years since I did the tasting. And of course, when you're doing a tasting, you're tasting a very small amount, and you're tasting in a hurry, because we only have a few minutes for you to do the tasting before we send you on your way, and the next tour comes in. So it wasn't a great tasting experience from a way of me having a really quality palate at that time, and my nose was not quite ready for it. Now, very different. So the first thing that I nose on this whiskey is not what you would expect out of a sherried whiskey. You might expect that you're going to get your dark fruits, your plum, your raisins. It's there, but I get more peach and apricot out of this whiskey, and a nice sweet grain kind of a nose that comes in on this one. It's a whiskey that the nose follows through, and that peach, apricot, grain, some apple in there. It has more of the fruity, lighter fruity character, which is surprising because Oloroso is usually giving you the darker fruits. But I pull a lot more of the brighter fruits out of this, and then I have the some nice spice in there that comes in. There's a little honey grams. I don't know if you've had honey grams before, but there's a little honey grams that comes in there. Really, really nice flavors. And on the finish, you're just left with that apricot peach. It's like and maybe a little honey also, and that grain, and it just flows through from front to back. The nose maybe is a little less intense in its richness as when it hits your palate. But when it hits your palate, those flavors are apparent. It's got a nice, thicker mouthfeel to it, and it's a pleasant ride from beginning to end, and there's no real disappointment that comes in. It just kind of gets better and better as it flows through. So, fantastic whiskey. It's one that you may look at the label and go, you know, it's kind of old school and maybe feels a little bit dated to you, and you're like, you know, I mean, I see all these flashy bottles up on the shelf. Why should I go for this older style label that looks like it's straight out of the 1970s? Well, it's because what's in the bottle is what really matters, not what's on the label. And I think too many distilleries pay attention to the label and sometimes forget what's supposed to go inside. But this is not your typical Speyside. It's not going to be what I call a sherry bomb. This is a fruit bomb. This has a lot of really nice stone fruits to it. And if that is your thing, then you're going to really enjoy this whiskey. If that's not your thing, then you might look elsewhere. But for me, when I'm in that mood, this is actually a really, really nice whiskey. 43% alcohol, but it drinks with a nice mouthfeel, so you don't feel like you're being cheated on the ABV. It would be nice to probably taste one that has a higher ABV to it, but I think it's adequate where it is on this 12-year, and it's really nice whiskey. Nice whiskey. Leave your notes, by the way, on whether you've had Glenfarclas, comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe. Liking helps more people see my videos and helps inspire me to do more of these tastings along the way and add a little education in or some travel advice, that sort of stuff as well. So, until next time, cheers and Slainte. That is a very good whiskey.